thinking I do mine.
Show. Hey everybody, I posted the link to the slides in the chat window there. So if you want to follow along or download them off SlideShare, you can. You'll also see that there's a link to some other resources throughout the deck. So I won't spend a bunch of time going over that. So, but they're there for you on dkparker.com. So see some friends in the crowd too. That's super fun, even at a distance. So agenda-wise, I'm going to give you just a quick intro to me, talk about business model breakdowns. What are the parts of the business model, which include the revenue models? Talk about your first and number one sprint of a startup, which is how to get to product market fit. I'll break down the 14 revenue models for you fairly quickly, and then we'll talk about revenue model and economics and why revenue model matters so much in terms of what the enterprise value of your company is. So that's the agenda today. I've got about an hour. I'll take about 45 minutes-ish and then leave it open for 15 and Q&A. But if you have questions as we go, drop them into the chat window and I'll answer them as we go too, so feel free, okay? All right, so for me, 5-time founder, more time as a board member these days. If you remember Startup Weekend, I was the Senior VP of Global Programs for Startup Weekend, which was a merger of Startup Weekend and Startup America to form Up Global. We sold that company to Techstars in 2015. It was my 10th transaction, or that was my 9th transaction, which was weird because it was a for-profit sale to a nonprofit. So all the money that we made on the sale, we actually distributed to other nonprofits. So it was, I would call it the most gratifying and least satisfying sale I ever did. Because usually when you get done doing a transaction, you're like, woohoo, bonus check. In this case, it was woohoo, give the money away, which was fun too. So I created a program called Startup Next, and Steve Blank, as you all know, was actually my board member. So the program took the I-Cores, Steve Blank materials from Lean Launchpad, and is really, that's converted into the book that I have coming out March 30th called Trajectory Startup. So it's ideation to product market fit. Is the book, what the book covers. And I'm an occasional angel investor and been a VC a couple times. So kind of both sides of the table from that perspective. But I think of myself as a founder first. So I'm testing out a new title of author. We're seeing how it goes. So far it's too early to tell. So the book, you can, if you want to order on Amazon, but do take advantage of the free revenue model excerpt. So the 14 revenue models excerpt from the book also include all the unit economic drivers that I'm going to talk about today in more detail. So if you have more questions about a particular revenue model of the 14, they're broken down in the book, roughly in order of difficulty. So the order I'm going to hit them on for you today is there, but that's a free download on the excerpt. And you can get that. Let me just post it as well so you can do that too. I didn't think about having that in as a visible link versus an embedded link. So here you go. All right. And just a heads up that because of COVID, I have a new puppy named Daisy, and she may break in at any moment, just so you know. So a whole bunch of 20 pounds of fluff. So business model breakdown first, I want to break this into a Venn diagram for you. There's basically three big buckets of your business model. The first one is called creating value, and that's your product or your service. And that's driven by a combination of your product and your team and your TAM. So when I think about your 10 or 13 slides, depending on what your slide deck is for your pitch, your creating value is what's the product or what's the service or what's the combination of product and service that your team is delivering to whom. So that's the top circle of the Venn. Hopefully you know what that product is, and hopefully you've done your TAM exercise, as much as sometimes it's ruefully academic and painful. So know that that's the first of the circle of the Venn. The second circle is the capturing value, which is what is your reasonable to exceptional profit margin. So that's the outcome of the three circles of your Venn, but know that that's going to be one of the things you're gauged on as far as the enterprise value of your company is what are your gross margins? Are your gross margins high and sustainable or low, and can they increment up? So how do you impact that? Gets you down to the third piece of your Venn, which is how do you deliver value? And the delivery value is really all in your control, right? What do I price this product at? How do I drive the economics of it, which is the revenue model? How do I do marketing? And how do I do sales? So those are all the levers that you're going to pull in order to have a good outcome in your gross margins. So I'm going to break those down for you in each of the revenue models today. I'm not going to hit your overall pricing today or talk too much about marketing and sales, a whole different exercise. Somebody's TAM, so your total addressable market is your TAM. So early stage startups, the value of your company is based on how big the total addressable market is you're serving. So if it's super niche-y, you're going to have a super niche enterprise value. If it's super big, you're going to have a super big enterprise value. So if you think about it as in terms of how big is the customer base that you serve, so that's your total addressable market. Okay. All right. So delivering value, capturing value, and creating value. So those are your three big pictures of your Venn. And basically, as they ebb and flow, you have to answer the questions of each of those pieces. Is the product of great value? Does it answer a problem? Do customers love it? That's creating value. How do you sell it? Direct or indirect? Through channel sales. How do you market it? Do you market it direct to consumer or through a channel? What's your return on advertising spend? Right. All of those things then drive the gross margin that you get to have as an outcome of the product. So it's not enough to have a product alone. You need to have a go-to-market strategy, and you need to have enough capital to use the go-to-market strategy to get to margins at the end. So if you just have a product and you're like, we have a great product and people will find us, then you're just being delusional, and you're part of that founder base that I deal with all the time, and which I am one of, mind you. So all of us as founders are slightly delusional, or we wouldn't do this, because 75% to plus of founders fail. So, and we'll get to why you fail here in a bit, not you, because I know that in a room of 100 people, you look at the other folks in the room and go, bummer for them, because I know I'm going to survive, right? Because that's the way all of us as founders feel. So are you discussing the value here to investors or customers? The value that you create is for the customer. So is it a problem or is it not a problem? So if it's a meh problem, so when you do customer development, if the customer comes back with a meh, right, then it's not a problem. If you're doing something that's fun and game oriented and you're really solving for the problem of boredom, that's okay too. But most of us are solving for a problem. So something where a customer feels acute need for. The outcome of that to the investors is how much is your company worth? Like if you want to be a unicorn, you have to be high value on the product. You have to be high margin on the capturing value in your gross margin, and you have to be very efficient in how you do your go-to-market. Those things get you to highest enterprise value or make you a unicorn. So, but two of those three things will mean you're not a unicorn, so you know. All right, so those are your defining factors of your context of today's conversation about revenue models. What happens if one of them is out of balance? Then if you don't know your go-to-market strategy, then your returns are going to be bad, right? Or if you're guessing about your go-to-market strategy, your returns will be bad. One of the things you'll find about the economic drivers of startups is you have this concept of unit economics. And one of the things you can track is for my marketing spend, how many days does it take for me to get return on advertising spend, or ROAS, R-O-A-S. So if you don't know your ROAS number, or you don't have a thesis in your economics, you'll find that investors aren't super enthusiastic about your product, regardless of how cool you think the product is. So having that go-to-market strategy is going to be important. All right. So your startup lives in two epochs. Epoch number one is think BC, and of course AD, think pre-internet kids and post-internet kids. Think pre-Game of Thrones and after Game of Thrones. So your product exists right now pre-product market fit. Your mission, and your only mission at this point, is how do you get to post-product market fit? So like, do you need to know how to run a board meeting that doesn't suck? No, like you can learn that later. Do you need to have great culture? Well, if you're a jerk, you probably need to address that now. But if you're an okay person, the answer is you can fix that later. Now, this doesn't apply with services companies. So a service company doesn't need product market fit. If you're doing services, commercial landscaping is an example, other people provide that service. So there's not really a risk of product market fit. The question is, can you sell it and at what profit? If you're shipping a product, something that's new and never been done before, then your sprint number one is to get to product market fit. And product market fit is roughly defined as you're getting customers and you don't know why, but it's word of mouth and people are talking about you, and your return on advertising spend is actually working. So I won't go into huge detail of product market fit today. I'm sure you'll be talking about it at some point. I saw a note, never mind, keep going. Okay, so where are you in that continuum of product market fit is really the question mark. The closer you get to product market fit and PMF, the less you need risk capital and the more you need growth capital. So if you've ever been exposed to DocuSign, a friend of mine started DocuSign. It was an 18-year overnight success story. He started it when it was actually illegal to do digital signature. So I'm sorry, it wasn't legal. It wasn't illegal. So, but it wasn't actually legal. So in his case, before they went public a little over a year and a half ago, they raised about $400 million of capital. It was the easiest round they'd ever raised because they knew all of their unit economic drivers. They knew if they invested $10,000, how many days it would take them to have positive return on that investment. At the early stage, you're shipping a product that most of the time nobody's ever seen before, or maybe it's a copycat of somebody else's product, right? So the question there is, that's a risk capital story. It either works or it doesn't work. In the case of the last round of funding for DocuSign, it was a growth capital story. We just want to go from a $10 million business to $1 billion business, right? So there's a different set of rules and things you need to do. So where are you on that continuum? Most of you are farther left on this. We're like MVP stage and we're thinking about how we go to market and we're doing customer interviews and validating that the customer actually cares. As you move up the continuum, you're going to now start risking capital with the growth of the company and figuring out how you sell it, which those economics matter a lot. So what are your biggest risks? Well, here's why startups fail. So this is the CB Insights data. They do this data every quarter. You'll find it has changed very little over the last 5-6 years. And the number one reason startups fail is they build a company they build a product nobody wants. And the definition of want here is it's not useful, it doesn't change my life, it's not helpful, it's not really a problem, and I'm not willing to pay for it. So between not building something that nobody cares about and not being willing to pay for it is your number one cause of why it breaks down. So you need to answer that question fast. Can you build the product? Sure. Can you get paid for it? That's a great question. So that's really the topic of today of how startups make money. But those are the reasons why startups fail. So don't be a casualty, like address the top questions first. All right, so how do startups make money? So first off, how not to make money. Here's some good examples of how not to make money. Small transaction values are bad. So if you're in basis points or small transaction fees, that's a bad sign. If you're not being able to capture value for the value you've created, that's a bad sign. So people go like, yeah, it's super cool, but I won't pay for it. That's a bad sign. Lumpy sales cycles are bad. Selling to universities or government, long sales cycles are bad. So if you have a lumpy or long sales cycle, and if your pricing is too low from the onset, that's a problem. So one of the standard problems that early stage startups do is they start their pricing too low because they have an MVP. where I would encourage you to start your pricing higher and discount for the first year promotion, but set an expectation that the price is higher, just because it's hard to move pricing up once you've moved pricing down. Okay, so those are some good examples of how not to make money first. So let's move on to how you can. So what's the data from? It's not just my opinion. So it started off fairly innocent enough. I was talking with the founder who said, hey, can I have your financial model? And I'm like, well, mine's a subscription, yours is a marketplace. They share common things, but they're different. So I asked the CEO of Crunchbase at the time to pull a list for me of every funded company, seed funded company in the last 18 months. Ends up it was 2,654 companies. We tracked those companies over a 5-year longitudinal study, which was never the intention. And we basically now 6+ years, and we categorized all of those companies into what revenue model they used. And then we tracked the success and failure rate of them based on their seed to A funding and their A to B funding. So interestingly enough, if you go back and look at the failures had a very common theme. About 85% of them had no product page with pricing and no clear call to action. So if the customer came to the site, I could read English and words and sentence structures, but I couldn't take any action. There was no like, what's the price of the product? There was a call us for more information. But since you're not the only product out there that does that thing, I have 2 other companies who I know the price of, and I have one I have to call. I just don't call. So most of those companies went out of business. And we went back and did the Wayback Machine in the Internet Archive to actually look at the why they went out of business and their last cached pages. And that was a pretty consistent theme. So, so the business model then is the 3 components together. The revenue model is the parts of how you monetize it. And all of these lean towards tech, but they're not exclusively tech. So quick note on how did they map out. So we took the data, ran it through Mathematica and plotted these out. And you'll see that this is seed to A funding here, and this is A to B funding here. A couple of interesting outliers. The fastest ones to fund from A to B were gaming and in-app sales, because once you have a product there, it's easy to monetize, and the margins on virtual swords are amazing, right? So the cost of goods sold on that one is super great. You'll also see here the combination revenue models were actually fastest to mature from seed to A. So if I started with service revenue plus subscription, or subscription revenue plus metered service, which I'll break down here in a minute, those companies matured fastest from seed to A round, where gaming matured fastest from A to B round. So in retrospect, not really a surprise. All right, so I'll walk you through the 14 in various level of detail, but I'm going to cruise through these and then give you a summary at the end. Your objective is to pick your primary and secondary revenue drivers from this exercise, because with that, you can then go on to say, oh, we're a company that does this product, and this is how we monetize. So that's your objective. So I'm going to cruise through them kind of fast. You can go through them in detail at your own pace and leisure later. Number 1 is fee for service. It's a services business, right? So you could think about this as a consulting service. If it's B2B, you think about it as a guitar lesson service if it's B2C. It works in both B2B and B2C. Your key metrics are your project revenue. How much am I getting paid either hourly on a project? What my cost of delivery is. So in here, if it was consulting, it would be my pay rate and my bill rate. So if I hire Carlos to do a consulting project for me, and I pay him $50 an hour and the client pays me $100 an hour, I have a 50% gross margin. So that's my services hour. Services are hard to scale, however, because at some point I have to hire more people to deliver more services, which means my costs go up with my revenues. And classically, this business is like a consulting firm or an accounting firm or a law firm. They don't scale as well as a product business does. And we'll get into enterprise values here at the end. But overall, fee for services, easier business to start, and you can hire people to do it. You have to continue to hire people as part of the challenge. So that's the services business. Commerce is number 2, been around for a long time. But if you think of this as Amazon, or the business-to-business version, which was Amazon supplied, and now it's just plain Amazon. It works in both. I can sell my own product, or I can sell somebody else's product. My key metrics here: what are my wholesale cost of goods sold, and what's my retail price point, which gives me my average margin percentage. And then I'm looking at my average basket, which is my average number, my transaction value, and how many transactions I'll do a month. So that gives me my unit economics on commerce. And again, it can be a product I own and sell direct, or it can be a product that I'm a reseller of. Commerce fits both of those. Could be physical goods. I can start with wholesale pricing, or I could be a wholesale commerce suppliers as well. And this one can mature into a marketplace. So Amazon, as an example, actually matured into both. It still does commerce, obviously, but they do marketplace as well. Subscription, you'll hear this referred to as SaaS. SaaS is actually a hosting model or cloud-based. There's a lot of free products that are cloud-based or SaaS-based, but subscription is the economic model behind it. Think about this historically as magazine subscriptions. It was annual recurring revenue, ARR, or monthly recurring revenue is the way we track it today, and MRR. So whether that's usually now cloud hosted, your key metrics here is what's your average revenue per user or average revenue per contract. So if you're selling B2B, it would be per contract, and B2C could be per user. What's my conversion ratio? So I'm looking for traffic at the top of my website, number of people who do a trial or a demo, and then number of people who convert to paid is my key metric there. Less churn. So churn is the number of customers that leave me on a monthly basis. So if that's 2% of my customers per month, it's 24% of my customers per year. And typically churn in the early days is going to spike a lot higher than churn will be at a mature state. But keep in mind, all of the metrics I'm talking about end up being data that you need to do your financial model and your projections. Without the data, you can't do the projections. So the challenge here is that your MVP may not be enough. Like you're going to have to, you can launch an MVP, but to get to a subscription revenue, you're really going to have to build a kick-ass product, which is the challenge of launching with an MVP. So this one does have one of the highest multiples on the enterprise value as far as what the company is worth. And I'll walk you through that math here at the end. Metered service is one of the, in that 6+ years we looked at it, at the beginning, you may remember a company called Groupon. Groupon had a unique revenue model. Ultimately, Groupon was a commerce model with lead gen was their combination. And remember all the copycats of Groupon, if you were watching startups then? Like there were thousands of copycats of Groupon. Revenue models aren't defensible. Revenue models are very public domain. So if you come up with a new revenue model, I'm happy to add number 15, right? But just know that your revenue model in and of itself is not a defensible tool. So metered service is one of the most, is the newest of the years that we've watched them. And there's only really been 3. Groupon's went away, coins and tokens came out, went away because there were no economic drivers on coins and tokens, aside from the SEC. And then metered service, think AWS, Splunk, Azure, Twilio. There's some other great ones in there. Typically starts as a subscription as a base. And then as usage goes up, the customer pays more. Typically, this is B2B. The only example I know of a B2C, and if you have one, let me know, is your mobile bill. And it's typically a negative on B2C where it's a positive on B2B. So if my AWS bill goes up, it typically means I have more customers using my product. And it's a leading indicator of future growth because as a B2B product, it means my customers are using more of my product. So that's the one B2C example. So like subscription, it's average revenue per user, but I'm looking at user growth on a monthly basis is the key metric there. So, okay. So that's metered service in number 4. Number 5 is transaction fee or rental business. They're 2 different businesses, but the economics are the same. So in the transaction fee or rental business, if you guys know, Chegg is the rental company that rents books for academics and for colleges. The rental business it works in both B2B and B2C. I'm taking a transaction fee on the total revenue. Typically, in this case, I'm not selling the product, so I'm not booking total revenue. I'm just taking the transaction fee. So the question is, what's my average transaction fee in a dollar amount or percentage? How many transactions will I do on a monthly basis? And then what is my, again, the fee or margin on that transaction? So if I'm renting a book, in the case of Kickstarter, it leans towards a marketplace, and then the marketplace one has multiples here. But in the case of Kickstarter, there may be $100,000 raise. Kickstarter will take a transaction fee on that money raised, right? And that's their business. That's the transaction fee business. Okay. The big challenge here: don't start your margins too low. Like if you remember Upwork, it was Odesk and Elance before they merged together to become Upwork. They were at 15% margins, and the CEO had to take one in the chin and tell everybody they were going to up their margins to 20% because they weren't going to make it. So just know you can't start your margins too low here. So that's number 5. Number 6 is a variation on services. It's called Productize a service. If you productize a service, you sell the product for a fixed price, and the customer doesn't really care how many people or technology sits behind it to actually deliver the product. So I'm on a board of a company that does this called Guidant Financial. So you can actually buy a SKU to convert your 401k to a self-directed IRA to invest in your own business. It's a fixed price purchase, but there's people and technology in the background that deliver it. Now, this business is probably one of the easiest to bootstrap behind services, but it also isn't really a product business because you still have people involved in the delivery. But it works in both B2B and B2C. So Moz, for those of you who have been around Seattle for a while, used to be SEO Moz and then just became Moz. It was a consulting company that built a product at the customer's expense, and at some point made the leap to just be in the product business. But most of those companies start with a combination of products and tools and then migrate to product. Okay, so that's number 6. Number 7 is combinations. So if you think in terms of, we have if you know Smartsheet here in Bellevue, Smartsheet is a company that does a subscription business for enterprise, but 25% of their revenue is professional services to help their customers deploy their product. So what Smartsheet found, and they're publicly traded in a market cap of somewhere north of $5 billion, I think these days, 25% of their revenue is professional services at a 50% gross margin that help them compress their sales cycle to deliver a subscription service. So Wall Street doesn't hammer them on a combination model. Wall Street actually sees that as a way to shorten their sales cycle. So if one of your investors says, we'd like a pure play SaaS company, you can let them know that, hey, actually combinations work well as long as it shortens the sales cycle and helps you get your product to the customer faster. So this can be a transaction fee plus a subscription if you're a marketplace, which is the next model. So marketplaces, think eBay, Alibaba, Etsy. So the challenge of marketplaces is you have 2 funnels, right? You have a marketing funnel for the sell side and a marketing funnel for the buy side. The good news about marketplaces is that if you build them you have to ratchet them up as you go. But if you build out both sell side and buy side marketplace, you've built out competitive advantage. The challenge of it is you have to have both a sell side and a buy side sales process for marketing and conversion ratios, and you have to track them separately. If you don't track them separately, you will be confused by your math, right? So you have 2 different funnels for marketing, 2 different funnels for sales. So your key metrics for marketplace are average transaction amount. So what's the dollar value of that transaction, $100 or $1,000? How many transactions will I do a month? And what's my margin or transaction fee on that business? So here you see in marketplaces now that those marketplaces are doing both transaction fees and subscriptions, where the sellers pay a subscriptions for premium listing. So the combination model is what you see most often in marketplaces today. By the way, start with 2-sided marketplaces. Don't try B to B to C to G to just nail one of them first. Some things work good at launch and some things work only at scale. Complex marketplaces work at scale, but you have to survive launch long enough to get to scale. So that's the important thing with launching. So we get a little more obscure here as we get to the end, but lead generation is the next one. So if you know Mint, when I first started explaining this, Facebook hadn't sold all of us out. So when I was like, if the product is free, you're the product. People were like, I don't understand that. And now everybody understands it. Like if you're with Facebook, you're the product. So Mint, All-Star Directories, NetQuote are all examples of lead gen companies where they're better at capturing form data on the web, and they take that form information and sell it to buyers. It tends to be a lousy customer experience, but it is a legit revenue model. So gaming, I mentioned virtual swords. So if you're here just to relieve people of boredom and create fun, a good example is King, or the product is Candy Crush. Bought a company called 02, which is a gaming company here in Seattle a number of years ago for $150 million. If you're interested in gaming, a couple key metrics here are how many downloads, what's your convert to paid with in-app sales, and then what's the margins there are amazing, right? But your key metric here on gaming is what's the 21-day usage pattern. So it's a hit-driven business, very much like doing movies in Hollywood, right? You're always perpetually doing the next hit. So great revenue model, however. Advertising and search. The reason this is towards the end is because it's really hard and you need 1 million unique users before you have anything to actually monetize. So today I get 3,000 to 4,000 people that read my blog every month. If I had a $35 revenue per 1,000, so then I would make on average about $1,000. Or I'm sorry, I would make about $105 for that traffic on my site on a monthly basis. So if you don't have 1 million unique users a month, this one works at scale, but it doesn't work at launch. So if you're like, we're going to do advertising, the answer is you still have to raise enough money to get to 1 million uniques. So just know that yes, it's true, and yes, it works, but you need volume. New media, this is the revenue model that doesn't need a revenue model. So think WhatsApp, think Pinterest, think Facebook early days. This one only works in B2C. So Snapchat, WhatsApp is an example. It tends to work with network effects where the network performs better when I have more people on it. So, and you'll see that this is the one that people get to the unicorn number the fastest, because ultimately we recognize that customer growth is so good and viral. So when somebody says we're going to go viral, this is what they mean. If you think you have a viral company in B2B, you would be the first one I have seen after looking at a number of thousands of companies. But if you are, definitely hit me up. Happy to consider writing one of your first checks. Because the way you calculate viral coefficient is just for every paid customer you acquire, you should get greater than 2 additional customers through that paid customer. So that's the viral coefficient factor. So I blogged about it. There's a bunch on K-Factor available. Before the pandemic, viral coefficients weren't as well understood. Now everybody understands them. Big data is number 13. Patients Like Me is a good example of anonymized data that they turn around and make available to big pharma. But you have to have the data first. So again, this one works at scale, but not at launch, unless you have a massive data set that you can already use. All right, and number 14 is licensing. Licensing is the classic, if you remember back to Microsoft used to sell software licensing. My first startup was a software distributor that was the first new distributor for Microsoft in 15 years. We went from 0 to 32 million in sales in 4 years. And we did software license delivery. So, but licensing is in decline. So Microsoft no longer sells a copy of Office as a license. They sell a subscription of Office. So licensing is still a valuable model. It's just less interesting these days than it was 15 years ago. All right, so those are the 14 and fast overview. Here's your list. You get to pick a primary and a secondary. If you're picking one that's not on the list, you don't get to pick one. Well, you can send me one. I'm happy to look at it and say whether it's really a revenue model or not. But your idea is unique, I hope. But how you make money is never unique. So, and I've been watching this one a long time. So feel free if you have a model you want to send me. I'm happy to look at it and create the 15th. But right now I would say just pick a best practice, pick your primary model. If you're thinking of combinations, pick your secondary model, because you can pivot around it if you're wrong, but you should have a thesis of how you're going to monetize before you talk to your very first investor or customer for that matter. Okay. If you've picked a primary and secondary, give me a thumbs up. Okay. All right, so you can come back to this. Let me hit the last couple things around why this matters. So you're going to pick B2B and B2C. And just by examples, if you're a B2B services company, you may be a consulting company. If you're a B2C services company, you may be a Starbucks. I used to run a company called Code Fellows here in town in Seattle. It was a for-profit education that helped people in the retraining. We were a B2C services company. On the B2B product side, Salesforce is an example, and a B2C would be gaming. The reason I bring them up is those have different enterprise values based on who you're selling to, because your average revenue per user is different. The second thing to realize is that the enterprise value, or what your company is worth at the time you go to sell it, so after 10 transactions, right, is impacted directly by your revenue model. If you're a services company and we do $1 million in revenue, so Simon and I run a services company, we do consulting, enterprise consulting for CRM. We do $1 million in revenue, that company is going to sell for $1 million. Well, 750,000 to $1.5 million, depending on how profitable we are. Now, if Simon and I run a CRM company that does $1 million a year in recurring revenue, that company is going to sell for $12 million. So I would argue that if you're going to pick one, that you would pick one that has the highest enterprise value at the time you sell it. Now, combinations will take that 25% revenue of services plus a 75% recurring and give you a blended rate of the enterprise value. But it takes you just as long to build a product business as it takes you to build a services business. So know that that's part of the process that you're thinking about as you do this. It impacts what you raise money at what price point, and it impacts what your ultimate exit value is when you go to sell the company. So those are some things you need to know about enterprise value. So we are at, I'm a few minutes early. I know I cruised through those, but frankly, you guys can pick it up as you go and you get to pick your first and second. So what questions do you have for me about revenue models or go-to-market? So feel free to chat them or just come off mute and we'll be good.
Hey, Dave, I'm just going to chime in here as a founder that has struggled with getting investors to understand how and why your model will work, especially if you're talking about one of those things that involves having volume. And it'd be great if you can maybe talk to these folks about, how do you set that picture up for the investor to help them believe that you will be able to get to the volume and that the money is needed to get there before they can really start to truly monetize.
Yeah, so totally great question. So one of the things you'll learn about the process of getting to investors is if you can point me to a company that's already done something like you're doing on an adjacent market, right? It might be a direct competitor as well that's in a different market if you're doing a copycat thing. But the big question is, do I believe as an investor that the company is ultimately going to scale, and how are you going to scale based on a combination of what your go-to-market strategy is, in your case, going after counties and municipalities and selling dog tags at huge volumes, right? And do you have early proof or social proof that the customer actually cares, right? Because as you de-risk that based on both the revenue drivers and your go-to-market strategy, then the investor can look at it and say like, okay, I get it. I don't want to be the first and only check in your deal. I want to be a check that actually funds your growth, right? So the key here is, do you have a believable path in your go-to-market strategy, which starts with your economics or your revenue models, right? So that's because investors have a matching pattern is what they'll call it. Ultimately, I don't like the phrase, but I understand what they're saying, which is, have I made money in either this category before, or have I made money with this revenue model before? And do I understand what to look for early before you guys have proof, right? That's the important thing on it. Other questions?
We had a question from Simon. Simon, did you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, or do you want me to ask it?
I just wanted to understand a little bit more. I know you've explained it, but a B2B and B2C,
Yeah, for sure. So the question here ultimately, Simon, is who pays the freight? So in the case of Facebook, their users are consumers, but the buyers are businesses who pay for the advertising. So think of it in terms of if there's a question in your mind about who you're selling to, ultimately the question is who pays the bill. So if it's a product for students, it could be that the parents pay the bill, or it could be because the students don't have a credit card, or it could be that the school district pay the bill. So the answer there is I have a user that is a student, age 13 to 18, but the buyer is the parent or the buyer is the school district. So the clarity I'm looking for here is who ultimately cuts the check or gives you the credit card number because in my go-to-market strategy, I have to build out a strategy that helps me get to school districts, super lumpy sales cycle, or helps me get to parents, B2C versus B2B. So in the case of B2B in the school districts, I'm selling one-to-many.
Okay.
So in the case of B2C and selling to parents, I have to sell through direct advertising one-to-one. So I have a B2C model or I have a B2B model. And there's not a judgment of which one's better per se, right? It's really around which one's more efficient in your use of marketing spend to convert those dollars into cash.
Okay. In my situation, I'm trying to create, I don't know if I have time to ask this question, but field trip experiences for elementary kids.
Okay.
And what I would like to do is to create packaged trips with various museums and parks within Seattle. But the school district or the teachers cannot pay for that service. So I'm trying to get funders to provide a source of funding for the school so they can have these field trips.
Right. So the question here is, which problem will you solve first?
Yes.
So there's no easy answer to it.
Oh,
So
okay.
if, for example, you're going after funders, have you identified in my customer development interviews,
Okay.
have I identified 10 or 20, what I think is the ideal funder profile, which would be different than the ideal customer profile, ICP,
Okay.
right? Have I talked to 20 of them and had they said, if you give me a way to track this, I will pay for the funding. And then, because it starts with the number one problem, every startup starts with their number one problem. And that goes to, where's the cash? Right. So in this case, the question is, will the funders pay for the cash or create the cash to fund what?
Yeah.
Well, they'll fund these type of field trips, but not those types of field trips. Okay. So given that, cash, start with the cash, follow the money, right? These are the type of field trips. What students want to go to those types of field trips, right? But when you're dealing with a complex sales cycle because you have multiple users, you have to start with your ICP who pays.
Okay. ICP, you said?
Ideal customer profile.
Okay.
In your case, ideal funder profile.
And in this case, because I'm so confused about the B2B, B2C thing, where does that fall in regards to that terminology?
So if it was a foundation or a funder, it would probably be B2B.
I see.
Right. So if I can go to one funder and they can fund 10 field trips, then my users are the students, parents, and school districts, but my funders are B2B.
I see. Follow you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Forrest?
Could you describe the distinction between the productization of a service and new media?
Yeah, so Productize as a service is something where there's people and technology in the background delivering the product. So think of this as we're building a product for enterprise software, and we have one customer for us, and that customer is a big account. And we're going to build a custom product for them, but then we're going to use the product we built to then turn around and sell it to other people. So that would be Productize a service. So I'm using the revenue from that first customer to build out my product. In the case of new media, the examples there would be WhatsApp or Snapchat, right? They tend towards network effect or high word of mouth or viral coefficient products. They're all B2C. There's no B2B versions of them, right? Where the other one has both B2B and B2C. But yeah, WhatsApp, Pinterest, Snapchat are all examples of new media companies. And really that example of a revenue model is, you don't need a revenue model because we know at some point you're going to monetize through advertising, but your customer growth is so substantial that you don't have to have a revenue model yet. So those are the differences. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Marty.
Hey, great presentation, by the way.
Thanks.
You,
Clearly I've geeked out so much time on this topic.
As you said, you were able to go through quite a lot in a short period of time. What about the value for everyone here of doing some A/B testing? I mean, A/B testing is great on marketing. Everyone understands how to use it for different messaging. What about for revenue model, and even within a particular revenue model, trying to hit some pricing targets?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I do an entire pricing seminar, Marty, because pricing is a combination of art and science, and it's more
Yep.
engineering than it is art,
Mhm.
right? So A/B testing that, and you have to start high. So again, the quick version of it is A/B test the crap out of it for sure. If you don't have enough volume to do the lean startup methodology, because most of you don't have any volume at the top of your funnel anyway right now. So what you want to do is take 2 physical PDF printouts of your pricing tiers into the meeting with you when you do customer development. And if it's going well, you want to lay down the high price point one. And if it's going poorly, you want to lay down the low price point one. And I'm just looking for customer feedback of like watching their eyes and have them go, it's not bad. Or like, oh, that's really high. Right. And if the answer is it's high, I'm going to come back and say, that's okay. For our early customers, beta customers, we're going to give them a 50% discount off the first year. What I don't want to do is start the pricing so low that I can never move it back up. I'd rather start pricing expectation high, discount it for early users, discount it for the first year, right? And create an expectation that at some point your price is going to go up. But if you start your price too low, you won't have enough margin to pay for the advertising and reasonable margins and economics. So I'd A/B test the crap out of it is my answer. So there's lots of tools there. I think there's, I posted, let me find the, I've done a pricing seminar for WTIA cohort companies as well. And that slide deck is here. I'll post it on the, and so it's the slide deck for that pricing seminar. And I'll post it there in the channel for everybody if it's useful for you. But yeah, that's a 2-hour seminar on how to engineer pricing for sure.
And just a real quick follow-up on this. I'm sure you've come across the whole concept of value-based pricing.
Yep, we cover that in the seminar of cost-based versus value-based pricing.
Yep.
Value-based pricing for everybody's benefit. To Marty's leading the witness. Cost-based pricing is I pay Marty $50 an hour. I'm going to bill him out at $100 an hour. That's my cost-based pricing with 50% margin. Value-based pricing is I charge for it what I can get away with charging for it based on usually the jobs to be done framework by Clayton Christensen, which is what I'll reference in that slide deck. Anybody familiar with the new Toyota Supra that just came out? Super cool sports car. So when it first came out, I used an example in the slide deck of a $160,000 version of it because you couldn't find it. So value-based pricing is not based on what the car costs or what the retail price point was. It was based on the fact that nobody could get one. So that's value-based pricing at the extreme versus, so $100,000 markup on a $60,000 car. Other questions? I know this is a huge primer. Feel free to download the free excerpt that's in the window. If you're intrigued by it, feel free to pre-order the book. It comes out March 30th. I actually have to go into the studio at a much slower pace than I just did for you guys to go record the Audible book here in the next week or so. Okay, time for a couple more if you have them. Now's your chance. You can spin the revenue model wheel. Health and nutrition's apps as above. Thoughts on apps to track health. So in-app sales is really the way that those apps are monetized or purchase price of the app. So the app can be a subscription, so paid monthly like in Headspace, or the app can include in-app sales, which is typically done through either affiliate marketing to physical products, right? In which case it's commerce. So if I was building an app in the health and fitness, I would ask the question of, can I charge for it on a monthly basis? Do I have stickiness or am I going to have super high churn? So that would dictate whether I'm going to do an annual recurring revenue, annual subscription, or a monthly recurring revenue, monthly subscription. Am I going to monetize it exclusively based on that? If I have enough volume, read as more than 100,000 to 1 million a month, can I charge advertising? Is that a good customer experience or not? And can I do affiliate marketing, which enables me to do service? I don't want to be in the commerce business necessarily of selling the product, but can I make a referral fee for giving you product sales for protein to GNC, in which case I'm going to get a 10% affiliate marketing or a 7% affiliate marketing fee. But those are probably your choices.
And so what does the affiliate marketing fall under the model?
Commerce. Yeah, it's just commerce plus, it's the difference between a 30%, 35% gross margin and a 7% affiliate margin. But think, Mike, of affiliate is really marketing where the revenue model is just commerce. Make sense? you're on mute if you're talking. Robert.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Actually, you got to meet Court last week at one of my graduations and hear him speak about what your superpower is. So appreciate you mentioning about DocuSign. So my question is, and a lot of, and I don't want to speculate for many organizations or people here, but so working on the hardware, and hardware is hard, as most people should know that.
Yep.
So you have the revenue models up here, and I understand which revenue model I'm looking at, but I'd like to hear maybe your recommendation, your thoughts on those who are working on hardware. What is a secondary revenue model to kind of work on at the same time? Because taking our hardware to that next step takes time.
Yeah, for sure.
You need to make some money besides trying to get investors. So just kind of curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I did hardware once, and you're spot on. It is definitely hard. So hardware falls in the commerce model because you're selling your product at margins. You may have the ability to introduce a subscription if you have a recurring subscription component that's important, and you may have a path to big data, which is if I have this data from, for example, a bunch of IoT devices, can I at some point monetize that big data or use it in AI, but I'm going to monetize it via big data. So your path there is commerce with a straight markup model, subscription, if there's stickiness to it that the customer sees value, and ultimately a path to big data where you have the data set that you can turn around and monetize for the customer's benefit. But that's typically the glide path of all the hardware companies I've looked at.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Dave, I didn't ask, but where would my revenue model fall? I thought it would be fee for service or subscription, but that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yours would fall in a transaction fee.
It would be on the transaction fee. So there, I see. Okay.
Yeah, because you're going to take of that total capital raised, Simon, for that sponsor, you're going to take a transaction fee as part of that. And in your case, it's not a question of like, would the students go on the thing? Would the museum allow a group of students to come? Those are no-brainer questions. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Real question is, will somebody fund it?
Will someone? Okay.
And yours will end up being a mix of, so pull back from Simon's question here for a minute for everybody. All of these flow into a financial model, and I'm super geeky about financial models, obviously. But if you think about this, Simon, you're going to have like a certain percentage, 20% of your revenue is going to come, from school districts or from parents who want to pay to tag along and go to this event, right? Where you've cleared out and vetted the event. 80% is going to come from the funders, maybe 75, right? So the question then becomes, how does that revenue mix change over time? And how much budget are those funders willing to put forward to do it?
Okay.
So otherwise you just have a tool that connects people and makes them do that but it's super hard to fund. And one of the things of the 5 startups I did, one of them I look back on and go like, oh my God, I would never do that. Like that's a problem and people would like it, but they won't pay for it. Yeah. And I'm not suggesting people won't pay for yours, but that's the question you need to answer first.
Okay.
If cash is the number one thing, will funders pay for it? And if you find funders won't, and parents are the worst too, by the way, due to customer development interviews, it's crazy. They will tell you all the right things.
Sure.
And then when you ask for their credit cards, they'll be like, oh no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Because do you want your kids to experience these amazing things? Well, of course I do. Are you willing? So I go and build a product, and a friend of mine literally did this, Brian Starbuck, right? He went out and did all the customer development interviews to help parents let their kids find career information and videos across the web that aggregate these career information and videos so they could help them pursue their career and passions. And all the parents said yes. And Brian built it and went back out to all his parents and said, okay, it's built. Give them swipe the credit card. And they're like, I don't know that I want to do that. So be careful in your customer development interviews with confirmation bias.
Okay, let me ask you a further question and then I'll stop. But right now, a lot of my customer discovery has been with teachers because on that end, they're the ones sort of like planning the events at the school.
I would do 0 teachers and 0 students, and I would only do funders.
Oh, I kind of figured you'd say that.
The funders, if the cash is available, all of the teachers will say yes. And if the teachers say yes, all of the students will have to go.
Yeah.
But if the cash isn't available, then you don't have a business.
Exactly. Now trying to reach out to the funders, that's been so far hard to, do you have any advice about how to do that? I don't know if this is appropriate.
Yeah, no, I think for everybody, the main thing with your customer development interviews is prioritize the RAT, right? The riskiest assessment test. right? So your riskiest assumption is that funders will pay for it.
Okay.
Everything else doesn't really matter.
You got it.
Right? Could you build it? Is the technology available? Could I create a marketplace? All that's totally doable, right? The question is will funders pay for it? Or is there a way to get access to capital?
Okay. But as you said, following the money, follow the funders. Yeah, you got
Always.
it.
Only if you want to make money. Otherwise, it's just a hobby.
Yeah, you got it. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free. My contact info is there. If you need something, reach out. Definitely download the excerpt. I'm getting used to saying that word. And then thanks for having me today.
Dave. Clint, I hope you got your